ただいまより2022年ジャパンプライズ日本国際賞の受賞者発表記者会見を行います。本日の進行を務めます国際科学技術財団専務理事の益子康弘と申します。本日はオンラインでのご参加誠にありがとうございます。この記者会見の模様は YouTube でライブ配信を行っておりますので、ご承知おきお願い申し上げます。本日ご挨拶をいただきます先生方を紹介いたします。主催者の公益財団法人国際科学技術財団理事長、東京大学第28代総長小宮山博、日本国際賞審査委員会の委員長をお務めいただきました帝京大学特任教授、東京大学名誉教授の浅島誠先生です。はじめに主催者を代表して理事長の小宮山博からご挨拶を申し上げます。
国際科学技術財団理事長小宮山博です。メディアの皆様には日頃からジャパンプライズにご支援をいただきまして厚く御礼申し上げます。ジャパンプライズは1980年代の初頭、日本に科学技術の世界的な賞を作ろうという政府の構想に対して多くの方が寄付をもって応えられ実現いたしました。1985年に第1回をスタートし、今年で38回を迎えます。世界の科学技術賞の中でジャパンプライズは2つの特徴を有しています。第一は選考基準です。ジャパンプライズは人類の平和と繁栄への貢献を最も重要な選考基準としてまいりました。世界中から推薦された候補について、まず対象分野の専門家を集めた審査部会が主に学術的な卓越性を考慮して最終候補を選出します。その後、対象分野の専門家を含む広い分野の有識者からなる審査委員会が人類の平和と繁栄への貢献を基準として受賞者を決定いたします。近年、人類はさまざまな深刻な課題に直面しており、これらの課題が科学技術によって解決するということが求められております。ジャパンプライズが創設にあたって掲げた理念はますます重要になってきております。第2は対象分野です。ジャパンプライズは科学技術の全分野を物理、科学、情報、工学と生命、農学、医学の2領域に大きく分け、それぞれをさらに3つずつ合計6つの分野に分けております。毎年2分野から受賞者を選んでいますので、3年で6分野を一巡し、科学技術の広い範囲を網羅いたします。このことは技術の社会実装や社会基盤といった他の賞ではなかなか光の当たりにくい業績や物理科学生理学といった縦割りの審査では対象としがたい複合的な業績にも焦点を当てることにつながり、本賞の2つ目の特徴となっています。本年の受賞対象分野は物質材料生産分野と生物生産生態環境分野です。これまでの受賞者は101名に上ります。これまでの受賞の歴史をたどるとき、私たちが現在享受する暮らしの豊かさとその実現に果たした科学技術の役割を実感することができます。今後ともその意義を確信し、本賞がこれからも最高水準の科学技術賞として世界でさらに広く認知され、人類の平和と繁栄に 大きな貢献を果たさんことを強く願い、努力してまいります。メディアの皆様におかれましては、ジャパンプライズに対して引き続きのご支援を賜りますようよろしくお願い申し上げます。最後になりますが、審査委員会と2つの審査部会で大変なご尽力をいただきました。この場をお借りしまして厚く御礼申し上げます。
小宮山理事長のご挨拶でございました。続きまして、2022年のジャパンプライズ受賞者を直接審査に当たってくださいました審査委員会の浅島誠委員長から発表いただきます。
ただいまご紹介いただきました2022年ジャパンプライズ日本国際賞の審査委員長を務めました浅島誠です。今回の審査ですが、一昨年の11月に2つの受賞対象分野、すなわち物質材料生産分野と生物生産生態環境分野の募集定義を決定発表いたしました。その後、財団の登録推薦員である国内外の約15,500名の著名な科学者や技術者の方々に候補者の推薦をお願いしました。その結果、物質材料生産分野で208件、生物生産生態環境分野で138件、総計346件の推薦がありました。これらの推薦について、分野ごとに設けた2つの審査部会で、学術的な独立性、卓越性について厳正な審査を行い、同時にジャパンプライズの特徴である、その発見、発明がどのように社会に貢献しているかについても大いに議論、検討いたしました。また、その過程では、国内外の115名に及ぶ当該分野の有識者にも客観的なご意見をいただき、それも踏まえて審査委員会において受賞候補者の最終審査を行い、財団理事会にて決定いたしました。それでは、以上の審査経過を踏まえて決定されました2022年ジャパンプライズの受賞者を発表いたします。物質材料生産分野では、ビオンテック上級副社長で、ペンシルベニア大学脳神経外科特任教授、赤道大学の教授のカタリン・カリコ博士と、ペンシルベニア大学医学大学院教授で、ペンシルベニア RNA イノベーション研究所所長のドリュー・ワイスマン博士の2名の共同受賞になります。受賞業績はメッセンジャー RNA ワクチンの開発への先駆的な研究です。続きまして、生物生産生態環境分野では、スタンフォード大学ウッズ環境研究所所長のクリストファー・フィールド博士です。受賞業績は、観測に基づく先駆的な低疾患によるグローバルな生物圏の生産力推計と気候変動科学への目覚ましい貢献です。以上、3名の方々にお送りすることを決定いたしました。いずれも科学技術の進歩と人類の平和と繁栄の貢献を称えるジャパンプライズに相ふさわしい業績を挙げられた方々であり、心よりお喜び申し上げます。受賞者の業績について簡単にご説明させていただきます。まず、物質材料生産分野で受賞されましたカタリン・カリコ博士とドリュー・ワイスマン博士の業績を簡単に解説いたします。博士らが開発したワクチンは、2020年12月に世界に先駆けてイギリスとアメリカの両国で新型コロナウイルスワクチンの接種が始まり、2021年2月には日本でも接種が可能となりました。当初、開発には数年を要すると思われていたワクチンが約1年で量産にこぎついたことで、世界中の多くの命が救われ、経済的損失も抑えられました。現在、ワクチンは世界的な パンデミックの収束への大きな力となっています。短期間で開発されたのは、従来のワクチンとは異なるメッセンジャー RNA ワクチンです。メッセンジャー RNA は DNA と同じ核酸の一種で、生体内でのタンパク質合成の設計図です。1990年代には DNA とともに医療への応用が研究されましたが、副作用や副反応など望まない免疫反応が起こすことで障壁となり断念されました。しかし、2005年にカタリン・カリコ博士とドリュー・ワイスマン博士は、メッセンジャー RNA を構成するウリジンを就職核酸の不衝動ウリジンに置き換えると、副作用や副反応を望まない免疫作用を抑制することを発見いたしました。さらに2008年には不襲動ウリジン化によって目的タンパク質の生産量が上がることも報告しました。この一連の知見は、問わされていたメッセンジャー RNA の医療への応用の道を開き、今回の迅速なワクチン開発につながりました。次に、生物生産、生態、環境分野におけるクリストファー・フィールド博士の業績を簡単に解説いたします。将来の気候変動を高精度に予測するためには、地球全体の生物圏の動態を踏まえた推計が不可欠です。特に CO2、二酸化炭素の吸収源である植物が気候変動とどう相互作用しているのかを明らかにしなければ、人為的な CO2 の排出量の削減が分からず、地球温暖化への進行をどの程度食い止められるかも知ることができません。クリストファー・フィールド博士は、野外調査により幾多波の観測データを積み重ね、それをもとに葉の光合成速度が環境によってどう変化するのかを式で表せるようにしました。さらに植物群落を大きな一枚の仮想的な葉として扱える式を発展させ、気候モデルや衛星観測、海洋研究などとの融合によって、陸と海の合わせたグローバルな生物圏の CO2 吸収量の分布や大気中の CO2 の濃度の上昇の原因を明らかにしました。こうしたフィールド博士の研究は、地球温暖化対策の国際的枠組みであるパリ協定や IPCC 気候変動に関する政府間パネルなど、今日の気候変動対策における科学的基礎となっております。私からは以上です。改めてご一緒されました3名の博士に心からお喜び申し上げます。
畑島先生、ありがとうございました。それでは受賞者からご挨拶をいただきますけれども、今日はカリコ博士とワイスマン博士はタイからご参加いただいております。それからフィールド博士はカリフォルニアからご参加いただいております。カリコ博士、ご挨拶をいただきますようお願い申し上げます。
Good morning. I am deeply honored and humbled to receive the Japan Prize together with my colleague and longtime collaborator, Drew Weissman. This very distinguished award puts a spotlight on the importance of scientific research, technological advancement, as well as international collaboration that were so crucial for the development of mRNA vaccine, which successfully protected millions of people from the detrimental effect of COVID-19. This prize also recognizes hundreds of other scientists, doctors, and technical experts who over the last few decades helped to advance the knowledge on different fields that build the foundation for our work. By accepting the prize, I also think with gratitude about the frontline healthcare workers all over the world who were helping the infected patient, and some gave the ultimate sacrifice to help others. I am thrilled and honored by the recognition and look back on my long journey, which started in a small Hungarian town where, as a daughter of a butcher, I grew up. Thanks to my supportive family, my dedicated teacher, I could continue my studies at the university and became a scientist. I began my work with RNA as a graduate student in 1978 and became my favorite molecule ever since. I learned to synthesize RNA chemically, enzymatically. I learned how to modify to make efficiently translatable into proteins. My chance meeting with Drew Weissman led to a lifelong collaboration as we try to understand why the synthetic RNA is inflammatory and whether we can change that. Eventually, as a result of our decade-long research, we made the optimal mRNA suitable for therapy. Our discovery contributed to generate the very effective and safe COVID-19 mRNA vaccine, as well as open the opportunities for therapies to treat patients suffering from cancer, heart, and liver diseases. My journey from the humble beginning demonstrates that it doesn't matter how far you start, you can achieve so much if you put your mind into it and don't give up. So I hope that the recognition I am receiving today will inspire the future generation, and they too would like to be a scientist. I also hope that my example, women scientists will be empowered and will fight to get leading role. Today, I think with gratitude to my fellow scientists, inspirational teachers, mentors, and colleagues. Thank you very much.
それでは続けてワイスマン先生お願いいたします。
Those of you who know me know that I'm more at home in my lab than I am in the spotlight. And no offense intended, but I would much prefer to be there than in front of a camera right now, as you may be able to tell. I am truly grateful that work I did has helped the world. That's the hope of every physician scientist has when they're in the lab. And I'm incredibly honored to be the recipient of the Japan Prize and be counted among a remarkable group of recipients, which includes my colleague and longtime scientific partner, Dr. Carolyn Carrico. At Penn, Dr. Carrico and I investigated mRNA as a medical intervention. Each spark of something interesting, whether a finding we expected or didn't, motivated us to continue. Working together, we designed and conducted experiments, often trading emails into the early hours, unable to wait until the next day to share particular findings or ideas. We just kept working. Although the investigations that we began over 2 decades ago have culminated in significant discoveries and a vaccine against a pandemic-causing virus, much work is left to do. There is enormous potential of mRNA vaccines, therapeutics, and gene therapies. Equally important is ensuring everyone is able to realize the benefits. We are working closely with researchers and governments in other countries to help them create their own mRNA vaccines for COVID-19 to increase the global supply for people in low and middle income countries. And we are taking opportunities to educate people on the science behind this often misunderstood vaccine. Scientists know the work is never over. Our work is never over because our fellow human beings need scientific breakthroughs. They need the continuous toil of scientists. They need them not just for health disasters reaching pandemic proportions, but for diseases and maladies that have plagued our world for hundreds and thousands of years. They need knowledge, teachers, therapeutics, techniques, and access. They need results that come from the millions of people around the world who every day use their skills and talents to investigate the unknown. Tonight, I will take a second to appreciate how fortunate I am that work we conducted has helped millions of people around the world. but I also want to recognize the scientists who are at home in their own labs right now, fueling the engine of progress, doing the work that may lead to something amazing. Together, we'll see what the future looks like. Thank you.
カリコ博士、ワイスマン博士、どうもありがとうございました。マイクをミュートにしてしばらくお待ちください。それでは次にフィールド博士お願いいたします。
I want to express my deep gratitude to the Japan Prize Foundation, the Field Selection Committee, the Selection Committee in the nation of Japan for recognizing my work with the 2022 Japan Prize in the area of biological production, ecology, and environment. I am honored and humbled at the recognition. Also, I'm thrilled to congratulate Drs. Karako and Weissman for the 2022 Japan Prize in Materials and Production. Personally, I'm moved by three considerations. First, the recognition with the Japan Prize provides me with an opportunity to extend my thanks and to share credit with all of the family members, mentors, students, and collaborators who've inspired, improved, and supported the work over more than 4 decades. Especially my partner, Nona Chariello, is always my harshest critic and strongest supporter. She has a unique ability to ask the right question at the right time, as well as to provide compelling reminders that there is more to life than only work. Many mentors played central roles in opening the doors to a career in research. I want to specifically thank Harold Mooney and Joseph Barry. Both have been inspirational sources of great ideas and wonderful partners in building the intellectual and institutional foundations of the discipline that's become global ecology. Second, I'm thrilled to receive this award because in recognizing my work, it underscores the role of nature in helping solve the climate crisis. Climate change is the defining challenge of our era. Climate change is a problem that humans created and humans need to solve, but we also benefit tremendously from the carbon uptake that occurs across land ecosystems and the oceans without intentional human interventions. This carbon uptake, which in recent years has been more than half of the total emitted through human activities, is a massive free subsidy from nature, but it will not persist indefinitely unless we protect the ecosystems that drive it. Much of my work has been focused on understanding and quantifying the contributions of nature to carbon removal. But for the future, I see the focus increasingly on protecting and sustaining the ecosystems of land and oceans. Third, I'm grateful to have this opportunity and this stage to urge a redoubling of our efforts as a global community in tackling the climate crisis. My own research is a tiny fraction of the overwhelming evidence that we are suffering from widespread impacts of warming that's already occurred, and that further warming increases the risks of impacts that are pervasive, severe, and in many cases irreversible. While recent progress on technologies, policies, and pledges is encouraging, we still lack the commitment as a global community to prioritize decarbonization, adaptation, and climate justice at anywhere near the levels they deserve. We can still take steps to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. My work highlights some of the opportunities, but the real progress must come from increased ambition, investment, and commitment around the world. In closing, I'm deeply grateful for this recognition and for the opportunity to reinforce its messages about the importance of research and the role of nature in not only tackling the climate crisis, but also, as stated in the cabinet endorsement of the Japan Prize in 1983, furthering the cause of peace and prosperity in mankind. Thank you very much.
フィールド先生、どうもありがとうございました。特に、1983年に日本政府がジャパンプライズを創設した際の理念に触れていただきまして、どうもありがとうございます。フィールド先生もマイクをミュートにしてお待ちください。この後すぐフォトセッションを行います。 しばらくお待ちください。それではメディアの皆さん、画面のキャプチャー、それから PC の画面の撮影等を行ってくださいますようにお願いいたします。フォトセッションでございます。はい、ありがとうございました。それではこれでフォトセッションを終了いたします。続いて質疑応答に移らせていただきたいと思います。受賞の先生方、皆さん、マイクをオンにしていただきますようにお願い申し上げます。時間の許す限り、記者の皆様からの質問を読み上げさせていただきます。まず、3名の全員に対するご質問でございますけれども、今後ですね、各々の受賞された分野をどのように発展させていきたいと思っておられるかということについて、カリコ先生から順番にお願いできますでしょうか。
The messenger RNA as a therapy and as an application just come to the front line due to the pandemic and used as a vaccine. But the truth is that messenger RNA was already in clinical trial for many, many different applications, namely for heart disease and also some other diseases. And so these are the field which will be in the future and at present also will be applied. So certain liver diseases and heart diseases, and so that I think that we will see that messenger RNA will be used for many, many different applications for other diseases.
それではワイスマン先生、お願いできますでしょうか。同じ質問でございます。
Thank you. So I don't consider it my finding. I'm one of hundreds and thousands of scientists who have worked on mRNA and related fields for 50 years almost in a variety of forms. The future that I'm hoping RNA goes in is it has enormous potential. It has potential to make many different vaccines for very difficult diseases where prior vaccines have failed. Things like HIV, malaria, TB, hepatitis C, autoimmunity, food allergies. There's also a great potential for RNA to be used for other therapeutics, including gene therapy. I see a day where gene therapy may be a simple injection of mRNA LNPs that deliver enzymes that can repair genetic defects instead of bone marrow transplants and other very difficult and dangerous procedures. So I see RNA has enormous potential, and I look forward to the many researchers who will take what Katie and I developed and develop it further and solve these problems.
どうもありがとうございました。それではフィールド先生、お願いできますでしょうか。同じ質問でございます。
And my answer is almost the same as Dr. Weissman's, that scientific community has been working hard to understand the causes and solutions to climate change for more than a century. I see my work as kind of coming at a turning point where before, most of the effort has been on understanding causes of climate change and possible approaches to understanding the impacts. But increasingly, we have the technologies and the scientific perspective in order to evaluate advise on, and even deploy solutions. Now, I'm really proud that in the future, the scientific community is well poised to be delivering on solutions to this defining challenge of our era and not just identifying that we have a problem.
どうもありがとうございました。それでは次の質問でございますけども、カリコ先生とワイスマン先生に対する質問、お二人に対する質問でございます。お二人のご研究を進める過程で、今回の成果に結びついたポイント、あるいはこれは大きかったと思うようなエピソードなどがございましたらば、お二人にお願いいたします。まずカリコ先生、ご発言いただけますでしょうか。
Yes, so the most important moment was that we met. So as it was said, and the copy machine, and we started to talk each other and learn from what the other person is interested. So that's important lesson for other scientists, that sharing their experience with colleagues. And for me, because I was already working with RNA and try to develop for therapeutic purposes, and recognition that when I made the RNA and Drew was testing out on human immune cells, recognition that mRNA induced inflammatory molecules, and together we try to understand that why is that, because it was not known that single-stranded RNA that can induce this kind of mechanism was not known. And when we recognize which kind of molecules we are activating with the RNA, we try to come up with whether there is any solution, whether we didn't know that, whether we can make an mRNA non-immunogenic. And one important point was when we recognized that tRNA, the transfer RNA, was not immunogenic, and recognizing, of course, knowing that the tRNA has a lot of modified nucleosides, that gave us the idea that maybe we have to incorporate modified nucleosides into the RNA, and maybe that would not be inflammatory RNA. And of course, nobody has done before any such mRNA. And so we did a lot of trial and error, and eventually we could find one way to make an mRNA, which was not just doable, and we could synthesize the RNA, but it was also functional. It translated, and we demonstrated that it was not inflammatory in animals. So these were the major points when what led to the our discovery.
いかがでしょうか。
So I completely agree with Katie that was the key moment, that finding. I think the next one for us was the demonstration of we could make that modified RNA into a vaccine. And when we did that, it had phenomenal potency. It was more potent than any other vaccine we tried. And what was most important in our thinking, and this is back in the early 2010s, was this would be great for a pandemic because you could make a vaccine so quickly. We never imagined that a pandemic like this would hit us. But the fact that the vaccine was so potent, it gave such high levels of protection, turned out to be incredibly safe and could be made very quickly, made it the ideal solution for this pandemic.
どうもありがとうございました。それではフィールド先生、いかがでございましょうか。同じ質問でございます。
I'd like to point to three turning points in my thinking about global ecology and the challenge of climate change. The first came in the late 1980s when I was really inspired by a colleague named Inez Fung, who used the concentration of the atmosphere to calculate where on the land and the oceans extra carbon dioxide was being taken up. And it's a really a striking conclusion that much of the extra uptake was occurring in the middle latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere, latitude of Japan, of the United States. Now, that was followed shortly by a conversation with Harold Mooney about how we might use experimental approaches to ask how whole ecosystems respond to changes in climate and changes in the composition of the atmosphere that they're exposed to, that led us down a long pathway of collaborative studies to look at ecosystem responses to changing environmental conditions. And then a final conversation that was influential to me was with Paul Falkowski, an oceanographer who was then at the Brookhaven National Lab, is now at Rutgers University. And we realized as a result of this conversation that a potent way to understand the fixation of carbon dioxide into organic matter on the land and on the oceans was conceptually identical. And that led us to a very productive collaboration that helped us explain and predict and understand the productive capacity of the biosphere and the land and oceans in a common framework. But those are only three of many, many interactions that have advanced not only my work, but this broad front of understanding the function of the integrated Earth system and the discipline of global ecology.
フィールド先生にもう一つご質問が来ておりまして、先生の研究を始めた頃は気候変動というのはそれほど注目されていなかったかもしれませんけれども、そのような中で今のテーマの研究を始められたきっかけというのはどういうことでございましょうか。
Climate change is a topic that now is obvious to everyone around the world. We're seeing profound and serious impacts. But for people who were looking closely, the early signals of a changing climate were pretty obvious back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. The earliest measurements of atmospheric carbon dioxide from Dave Keeling, even in the 1950s, showed that human combustion of fossil fuels was already fundamentally changing the composition of the atmosphere. Early studies with global climate models, especially by Asukio Minabe at Princeton and James Hansen at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York, showed that when you change the composition of the atmosphere, you should expect to see changes in climate. And ongoing work showed that those changes were likely to be really consequential. So as a scientist who was working in this area, by the early 1980s, climate was a big concern. I feel deep frustration that my community has had such slow and incremental success in helping the world to focus on these issues. But it's important to recognize that the train of evidence supporting why we're seeing the changes we're seeing and what they'll lead to is really, really robust.
どうもありがとうございました。それでは次に3名の先生方に同じ質問でございますけれども、日本にも世界にも、科学の世界を目指す多くの若者がおりますけれども、偉大な業績を挙げられた先生方から、科学の面白さ、それから科学者に求められる研究姿勢はどんなものなのか、その他若者へのメッセージをお願いいたします。それではカリコ先生からよろしくお願いします。
So what we could say to the young scientists, first of all, that if they have to enjoy what they are doing, and science is something that is a very enjoyable thing to do, and the challenges in the laboratory and solving day after day those problems and proceeding and understanding part of the nature is a very enjoyable thing. And for any young person who want to look at what to select for the future, need to be selected something that they enjoy. And if they enjoy solving problems and challenges, then it is really good thing to consider to be a scientist. And so that's what I find the most important thing, that they have to be enjoy that what they are doing. And Drew, you say something?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Katie. I mean, I think that there isn't a particular personality type that goes into science. It's all kinds of people. But I think what's important is that a person has to have the interest. They have to have the curiosity. And most importantly, they have to have creativity. They have to be able to look at a situation and see things differently and wonder, maybe those different things are correct. And I want to investigate whether something is incorrect in science or in the world. That they need that curiosity and that creativity to be able to expand their mind and to look at situations and find the best solutions in them.
So one important thing also that to women is thinking differently. And so that's why women is also needed to be a scientist.
Yeah.
We need them.
Diversity is so important for science. I want to second that. I also want to add that a career in research is really fun. It's about solving problems. It's about confronting challenges, much the same as young people do in video games or in athletic arenas. The other thing that's really great about being a scientist is you get to plot your own path, and the sense of independence and the personal growth that comes to that is something that I've always really enjoyed. I've never been someone who liked having a boss, and a career on science lets you really be your own boss, set your own course, and pick your own challenges.
どうもありがとうございました。それではカリコ先生に質問でございますけれども、女性の科学者ということについて触れておられましたけれども、科学を目指す女性の皆さんに対するメッセージございましたらばお願いいたします。
Yes, so it is not easy because we still give birth and we have to be or try to be a good mother, good wife, and good daughter, and many roles. We try to do good at everything, and then we have to recognize that it cannot be. So one thing I suggest to the younger girls is to select a good husband who is supporting them, that who understand that the women can have dreams, and they need a husband who understand that and support. And of course, not to be a servant. So I want also to say that the women would support their husband and appreciate that they have a goal and they have a dream, and then together they work out and understand that each of them has some career goals, and then if they support each other. So you have to telling the women to find a good husband, and telling now the young men be a good husband.
どうもありがとうございました。それではフィールド先生にご質問でございますけれども、先生のスピーチの中で、Lack of Commitment as a Global Community ということについて触れておられましたけれども、これについて先生のお考えをもう少しお聞かせいただけますでしょうか。
As I said, we've known for decades that decreasing the emissions of heat-trapping gases to zero is essential for stopping climate change. As the most recent reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have documented, that if we want to have a good probability of avoiding the worst impacts of climate change, we really need to bring all greenhouse gas emissions down to zero in the second half of the 21st century and really as close to 2050 as possible. If you look at the international process around the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, you see a lot of commitments and some action. If you look at individual countries or companies around the world, you see a lot of commitment and a little bit of action. And what we need is to find a fundamental way to accelerate progress toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions so that instead of being on the current pace where emissions are still increasing, we really bend the curve and push emissions down to zero rapidly. I'd like to see a 10-fold increase in commitments to emissions reduction, and something like that is going to be essential worldwide if we're to avoid the worst impacts of climate change.
フィールド先生、ありがとうございました。時間が参りましたので、質疑応答を終了させていただきます。すべてご紹介できないことをお詫び申し上げます。回答しきれなかった質問に関しては、可能な範囲で追って回答させていただくようにしたいと思います。受賞者の皆様、どうもありがとうございました。このまま回線を切らずにお待ちいただけますでしょうか。メディアの皆様、本日はありがとうございました。授賞式は4月13日に開催予定でございます。一連の行事につきましては、詳細が決まり次第、お伝えさせていただきます。また、本会見の映像や資料は、当財団のホームページから入手いただけますので、ぜひご活用をお願いいたします。この後、すぐにグループインタビューの場を設けております。物質材料、生産分野のカリコ博士、ワイツマン博士にインタビューされる方は、このままお待ちいただきますようにお願いいたします。以上をもちまして、2022年ジャパンプライズ日本国際賞の受賞者発表記者会見を終了いたします。どうもありがとうございました。